Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering colleges panic, restore SAT requirements as woke students fail. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Zero Hedge, glimpse of sanity. Dartmouth returns standardized testing for admission after failed experiment. And Dartmouth is actually the first Ivy League school to do this. In response to the virus pandemic and the nationwide Black Lives Matter riots in the summer of 2020, some elite colleges and universities shredded testing requirements for admission. Several years later, the test optional admission has yet to produce the promising results for racial and class-based equity that many woke academic institutions wished. From National Review, Dartmouth becomes first Ivy League university to reinstate standardized testing requirements. From the Wall Street Journal, Dartmouth reinstates SAT requirement in first for Ivy League. Dartmouth isn't the first college to go back and say, you know what, we need to update this, we need to fix this. MIT has already done it. From MIT, we are reinstating our SAT, ACT requirement for future admission cycles. And why would they do a thing like that? Well, they say, it's in order to help us continue to build a diverse and talented MIT. Are you sure? Can you trust this guy? I'm not so sure. It's because it was obviously a ridiculous failure. You need to be able to evaluate students and give the most deserving students the opportunity to be successful. It wasn't just them. Georgetown did it as well. From Georgetown University's website, Georgetown University is very selective with an acceptance rate of 12%. Students that get into Georgetown University have an SAT score between 1410 and 1540, or an ACT score of 32 to 35. So if you don't actually have good standardized test scores, yes, you can't just get into every college. And this is why the only other option of having students actually have successful test scores is to just bring in anybody into the college, exclude the people who are actually worthy of getting into the college, and just drop the failing grades. Like this university in Oregon. Oregon University drops failing grades for students, citing GPA fixation. The university's VP of Academic Affairs said the changes will no longer mask students' demonstrated abilities. What they did in this case was they decided they would be replacing the D- and F grades with no credit to discourage undergraduate students from dropping out. So the students that are failing will get no credit, and then they'll have to go back and take those courses again, but it won't count against their GPA average. From National Review, Dartmouth becomes first Ivy League university to reinstate standardized testing requirement. Dartmouth College will restore its SAT requirement for admissions beginning with the class of 2029, making it the first Ivy League university to reinstate the testing requirement after doing away with it after COVID. In an email to the university community, Dartmouth President C.M. Bielak wrote that the decision to re-implement the standardized test was made in response to a faculty study which found that standardized test scores are an important predictor of a student's success in Dartmouth's curriculum, regardless of a student's background or family income. Performance on such tests is an important barometer of student academic caliber, the faculty said. They finally just figured this out, that yes, you need to be able to pass some standardized tests so that we can judge you on something other than your skin color, so that we can judge you and see, yeah, this person looks like they can actually make it through our college. They won't be an embarrassment to us. They won't drop out because, of course, the colleges really don't want dropouts. They want people to succeed, be able to get an education, then go off into society and actually do the college proud. Represent the college well once you get out of school. Maybe even make donations back to the college from your successful career, like actually have college mean something to people's future and their career. With Dartmouth recruiting more international students, as well as students from lesser-known high schools, test scores provide more data on academic prowess. But we're getting more and more applications from all around the world, and so in order to find high-achieving students, test scores turn out to be a really helpful tool. Our analysis shows that we potentially miss out on some great applicants when we don't have the test scores. Test scores are always addressed in the context of the student's high school profile regarding demographics, college attendance rate, and test performance, which socioeconomic conditions are somewhat built into. The professors noticed there were certain cases in which applicants opted not to send their scores when the scores could have helped that student tremendously, maybe tripling their chance of admissions. Well, for a long time, Dartmouth has always practiced holistic admissions. That means that even when test scores are examined and used in the process, they're examined very much in the framing of the environment that the applicant is coming from. Their team is keenly aware of the level of advantage or lack of advantage, both at the neighborhood level and at the high school level. And that's fine, if there are people that have been successful, but they've been successful compared to their peers in their local high school, maybe they had a difficult family life, and they can see these numbers and then relate them to the context of what that student was able to actually achieve. That's meaningful. It's not something to exclude people. It is something to include people. At the same time, if you see students are incredibly average, they weren't successful, why would you give that person an opportunity that you wouldn't give to someone else? It doesn't make sense. This is like reinventing the wheel or rediscovering the wheel. Like, hey, what's that round thing on the bottom of my car? Well, it's a wheel. Yes, we know this works. This is how it's always been done, not because of racism, but because it works for everyone. Rather than handicap underprivileged students, the test requirement can help shine a spotlight on achievers from poor areas and give them a chance to succeed. Quote, that's why testing is so helpful to less advantaged students. Because when admissions sees, quote, wow, this student is really excelling in a less than perfect environment, that can be a very strong signal for that candidate. Of course, because then once you're in that college environment, you might be challenged, but you've already demonstrated you can function and you can thrive in a challenging environment. That's kind of like the whole idea of this. Coffin clarified that grades and extracurriculars are still important on an application, but they proved insufficient for selecting the most promising students, as the vast majority of applicants have very high grades and are very involved in extracurriculars. Quote, social science has a concept called the ceiling effect, Coffin told the Dartmouth. But when you plot people in a curve, there's a cluster at the top of the curve. That's our application pool. Most of the people who apply to Dartmouth are straight A students. Even for the last few years of test optional, most of the students who ended up at the college sent in testing results as part of their file, Coffin said. The college suspects that the applicant pool will shrink as a result of the move. But rather than viewing that fact as something that is disenfranchising students, the college sees it also as a mechanism to weed out unserious candidates. Quote, I would be sad as the dean of admissions if people were applying to Dartmouth only because we're test optional, Coffin said. Amid the pandemic in June 2020, Harvard University temporarily waived its requirement that applicants submit their SAT or ACT standardized test scores. The school then extended the waiver in 2021 and again for the 2022-2026 application cycles. In March 2023, Columbia University ditched its standardized test requirement for incoming undergraduate students. 2 years prior, the University of California system eliminated both the SAT and ACT tests from admissions decisions across its 10 schools, including Berkeley. However, other members of the Ivy League are now considering reinstating the testing requirement, Coffin suggested. All of our peer schools are studying it, as we just did. Although not in the Ivy League, another prestigious American college, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in March 2022, reinstated the standardized testing requirement for admission using similar logic to Dartmouth's. MIT admissions found that not having access to SAT or ACT test scores, quote, tends to raise socioeconomic barriers to demonstrating readiness for our education, which means we can't tell if you're stupid or not. If you're stupid, don't go to the hardest schools. Everyone should go where it's appropriate for them. That is the great thing about merit and standardized tests. This applies to me. This applies to you. It applies to everyone. That's how we can function in society and how the airplanes are not falling out of the sky. MIT's Dean of Admissions said the school believes a testing requirement is more equitable and transparent than a test optional policy, departing from other elite schools who dropped it amid criticism that it advantages wealthier students who can afford expensive test preparation classes. Of course, going to college has something to do with having the resources to go to college, to take those test preparation classes. I took them, but being prepared for college is not something you can just wipe away and say, well, it's not fair because you had a good family, you had a stable family, your family had more resources. When you go to the first grade, you're starting to prepare for going to college. It works out that way if you come from a strong family. If you don't, it's going to be more of a struggle. But of course, there's some value in having a strong family. And that's a consideration that people make when they decide to form a family. Do you want your children to be able to go to college and have a successful career and have a successful life that way? People do very well also outside of college. But each of these venues, each of these things people decide to go into, should be appropriate for them, considering their ability, considering their resources, and you don't have to test their family background. People are a product of their family. And here's how MIT decided they needed those test scores to accept their new students again. From New York Magazine, what does an SAT score mean anymore? The mass pivot to a test-optional approach reshuffled college admissions. MIT decided it was done. On the last Monday of March 2022, 2 weeks after MIT finished notifying 1,300 applicants that they'd been accepted and rejected some 32,000 applicants, a post appeared on the website of the university's admissions office. After 2 pandemic-disrupted application cycles, during which basically every college in America ditched its SAT and ACT requirements, the Dean of Admissions announced that MIT would be asking for test scores again, starting with the high school seniors applying this fall. MIT had determined that it needed tests to make sure its students could do the work, a conclusion after careful research, they wrote. The 1,400-word post was accompanied by nearly 3,000 words of endnotes citing everything from academic journals to MIT's own graduation data. In bringing back the tests, MIT was going out on a limb. Since the start of the pandemic, the system by which universities craft and replicate the American elite has radically shifted, and standardized tests, once a rite of passage for generations of teenagers, are no longer assumed mandatory. Instead, our relationship with the test has splintered into 3 positions. The first is the legacy policy, a test is required. The second is the test-blind or test-free approach adopted by the University of California system in 2021, in which test scores are eliminated from the admissions process altogether. And the third is the test-optional approach, in which applicants choose whether to submit a score. In the spring of 2020, 600 campuses, including the Ivy League, became test optional, a temporary workaround to close test sites. But then colleges kept extending the expiration date of their policies. Last September, Cornell said this year's high school seniors and juniors wouldn't need to submit scores. Stanford followed in November, exempting this year's seniors from sending scores. In December, Harvard went even further. Students applying as far out as the class of 2030 could consider their test scores optional. Even before the pandemic, there'd been a growing disenchantment among colleges towards requiring test scores, which study after study has demonstrated are strongly linked to the applicant's family income and race. Now, of course, test scores have absolutely nothing to do with race. Does it have to do with family income? Sure, to the extent that the family is able to really provide an environment where education is stressed in that family household. That's not a bad thing. That's just a reality. In 2019, according to the testing watchdog group Fair Test, nearly 50 campuses made test scores optional for applicants, a record number according to the Washington Post. Quote, there was a growing realization that the value of the test as a predictive tool likely didn't outweigh the harm it created, according to Fair Test. Until MIT's announcement, the only other admissions dean at an elite institution willing to publicly throw his weight behind the tests during the pandemic was Charles Deakin at Georgetown University. Deakin, one of the longest-serving admissions deans in higher education, is unapologetic in his belief in the necessity of tests. Quote, it's not politically correct, he admitted. It was not only that MIT was moving in the opposite direction of nearly all its competitors that caught high school counselors and admissions officers by surprise, but also how they framed the decision. Bringing back the SAT and ACT, they argued, would be more equitable than keeping tests optional. Evaluating applications without scores, quote, tends to raise socioeconomic barriers to demonstrating readiness for our education. And the SAT and ACT allowed MIT to identify some students who would not otherwise be picked up by other indicators because MIT, like most other colleges, buys names of prospective students whose standardized test scores fall within a particular range to assist in recruiting its first-year class. By being the first highly selective college to return to a test requirement, MIT knew they would face criticism. The day after the announcement, Vice Provost for Enrollment Management at Oregon State and a frequent critic of the SAT and its owner, the College Board, tweeted a thread of acerbic criticism at MIT, challenging their claims and ending, quote, just say you like the test, no one is going to cancel you. One of the few public admissions of MIT's decision came not unexpectedly from the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, which proclaimed test scores count again at MIT. So apparently you can't count on Oregon State for excellence. They don't believe in tests. They don't seem to believe in grades, at least not at this Oregon university, and the idea of returning to students having to submit standardized tests so they can show that they're capable of doing the work for the college they're going to actually go to is a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. It means the woke colleges are starting to wake up. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.